It's all good. It works out. It's fine. Good evening. The Design Review Board #1 public meeting of April 9th, 2009 is called to order. Please refrain from talking amongst yourselves during the meeting, and please turn off or put on vibrate all speaker phones and pagers. If you need to talk, please leave the meeting room. Anyone who wishes to speak, including applicants, is asked to completely fill out one of the speaker cards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff. You will be called to present a case or speak on a specific item as desired. Current Design Review Board agendas are available by calling our Design Review Board hotline at 818-548-3171 or by visiting our website at www.ci.glendale.ca.us. A handout describing the procedures of the meeting, possible board decisions, and Design Review Board reconsideration and appeals is available at the table by the front door. Please note that all appeals must be filed within 15 calendar days of the Design Review Board decision date. Roll call, Board Member Boladian.
Present.
Carter.
Present.
Garagos.
Here.
Chairman Malikian.
Here.
Mr. Zarifian.
Here.
Report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on April 2nd, 2009. Oral communications, I do not have any cards. Chairman Malikian, do you have any cards for oral communications?
I do not.
Okay. That brings us directly to the review calendar.
Okay. Before we start, first of all, I want to congratulate Miss Laura Friedman. I think she's going to be a great addition to the city and to the council, and I wish her all the best. Besides that, on the subject, I wanted to let everyone know that both Mr. Garagos and I have met with the architect at the city planning office to review one of my concerns that we will talk later. I just wanted to bring that out in the open and have everybody be aware of that. I didn't want to take up most of the time. I know we were going to have a lot of people speaking tonight. I just wanted to get a clarification and a technical understanding of why one of the suggestions that we had was not implemented. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified, and so we don't spend a lot of time here as far as talking about technical code issues and everything. So that was clarified to me, and I don't know if Mr. Garagos had any other discussion or anything that...
Just went over questions that we had at the other meeting and how they addressed it, and because some of the things I had asked for last time. So it was helpful.
Okay. And also we have Mr. Scott Howard present here. Thank you very much. And I guess I understand that you will be here until 6 o'clock today, or?
Mr. Chair, members of the Design Review Board, my plan is to be here until at least 6:30, but if it appears that it necessitates that I remain longer, I will make alternative arrangements with my spouse.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I guess we can start.
Good evening, Chairman and board members. We only have one case on tonight's agenda, and that is case number 2-PDR 2008-073B. This is for 3522 to 3534 Foothill Boulevard, and the applicant is Mr. Rodney Kahn. You may recall this particular project being presented for first-time submittal for final review back on February 12, 2009. This is a second submittal for final review. The previous decision by the board was to return for redesign with conditions. The project consists of demolishing the two existing commercial buildings, former Foothill lumber site, and constructing a new 3-story mixed-use commercial structure with 148 parking spaces within a subterranean garage. As you read through your staff report in great detail, there were numerous changes made to the particular project in terms of site plan, mass and scale, and architectural detail. What I would like to do is just go through the various changes that were done from the previous first-time submittal to the current proposal that you see before you, and then go directly into the board's comments. All right? To start off with the site plan, it essentially, and you'll notice here before you, these are the previous plans reviewed on February 12th. This entire board is filled with the current proposal. The site plan itself essentially remains very similar to what was previously reviewed. There were 4 changes, 2 of them significant. One would be the relocation of the central courtyard that was dividing the 2 halves of the building, which has now been moved over to the easterly side. There was also a reduction in the rear setback of the building. So this portion, the building distance to the rear property line, has been actually reduced. There has been a widening of the landscape planter and a very insignificant change, but there's been an elimination. The previous proposal had parking along one of the rear driveways, and it now features an extension of the ground floor retail space. In regards to massing and scale, the board previously saw a 3-story structure all along Foothill Boulevard. You'll notice that portions of the building have now been lowered to 2 stories. There's also been an overall height change. The building was previously at the maximum permitted 50 feet in height. The entire building has been lowered by approximately 5 feet, just over 45 feet in height. Again, the relocation of the entry court has created a somewhat asymmetrical design to the front facade, which also has influenced the overall massing and scale. And there have been modifications in terms of what staff called the setbacks and the stepbacks. The setbacks being the distance of the building from the property line, and in this case some of these have been somewhat reduced, and the stepbacks, there are portions such as along the rear facade that are actually are step back within the building itself that have been somewhat reduced. The next portion would be under design components. Previously, the building, and again, on February 12th, you were presented two distinct styles of building. One was a contemporary style, and one was obviously this mission style building. The applicant has proceeded going forward with the mission style building, not the contemporary one. The mission style featured an arcade along the ground floor. There was a homogeneous color and details that were, again, towards the mission style. As you see here, in the current proposal, the arcade floor has somewhat been shifted to follow the topographical changes of the site. The building itself has been detailed so that it appears that there are groups of structures. You'll notice 4 building forms, one here, one to the center of the portion with the front entry, another 3-story portion in the center as well, and then the 2-story sides. So there's been sort of a visual shift or grouping of the building itself that's evident not only in terms of the height of those groups, it would be the roof lines and the colors themselves. Going directly to the board's comments back on February 12th. The board at that point had 8 specific comments they wanted the applicant to address. The first one was to reduce the mass and scale of the building to better relate to the surrounding context by having the project present a 2-story streetscape to Foothill Boulevard. Consider, and this was a consideration, pushing the entire project down, for example, so the garage goes down 1 level. Obviously, there have been changes made. The changes obviously include an overall height reduction, an overall building area reduction. The building has been decreased approximately 6,000 square feet, And again, portions of the building have been reduced from 3 stories to 2 stories. If you look at the letter, would be the letter of the condition, whether the building has been decreased to a 2-story streetscape, in this case it is not, and the building has not been pushed down 1 floor, but there have been modifications made to this particular project to address the reduction of the mass and scale. Second item. This is a rather long one, so I'm going to read it very slowly because this was a very meaty condition. To provide greater architectural and design variety, to break up the project's front elevation along Foothill Boulevard in order to better reflect the adjacent development pattern. The symmetrical design exacerbates the visual length of the building, and greater variety would be more appropriate and consistent with the Mission Spanish style. Review the location of balconies, solids, and voids for a more asymmetrical design. This particular condition was somewhat looked at by staff as having 3 parts. One would be the design detail, that there'd be more greater variety of design detail within the building so that it's sort of broken up to be more reflective of the existing development pattern along Foothill Boulevard. The second was the asymmetry. The previous project, and as you'll notice, was rather symmetrical on both building halves with the entry courtyard. And the last one was to take a look at the balconies, the voids and solids, to use those balconies, voids, and solids to provide a more asymmetrical front facade. So with that intention, when staff took a look at the previous proposal versus the current proposal, the modifications that were addressed would be breaking up the building into these 4 groupings, whereas the previous facade read more as one elongated building, same color, same design details. The grouped forms themselves, again, are differentiated in terms of height, they're differentiated in terms of color, and in detail as well. The main entry, this would be another note, because the main entry was very centrally located and divided the 2 building halves. In this case, by moving and relocating the front entryway, there's been an asymmetrical shift to the building itself that's also reflected in the adjacent groupings. There was a comment made in the staff report that while there has been improvement made to the rhythm of the forms, that they somewhat remain repetitive and generally lack a substantial break in plane as shown on the 2nd and 3rd floor. So if you take a look at the actual building line in the floor plan, so there definitely is a grouping that's more vertical. When you take a look at it, it hasn't really changed horizontally along the building facade. Also, while the project has met certain aspects of this condition, it remains unclear whether or not the full intent of this particular condition has been met. Third item. While the traditional mission style design may be successful along Foothill Boulevard, the front and back elevations should achieve a level of simplicity and consistency in the architectural elements for unity throughout the building facades. You'll notice, and if you recall your previous discussion, the front elevation along Foothill Boulevard was rather articulated. It had the arcade, the Spanish along the ground floor with various roof treatments, whereas the rear was somewhat repetitive in nature and very monotone across the entire rear facade, as well as having a little bit of an unbalanced shift to the lower arcade that's above the parking. You'll notice in the current proposal there has been greater emphasis played to the rear facade so that it be more repetitive or more reflective of the front facade in terms of the grouping, the 4 grouping patterns throughout the building, as well as the color that's been carried over. And the actual, it's not so evident in the colored elevations, but it's more evident in the black and whites. The previous proposal had different arched radii within the project. There was definitely, in terms of the weight and nature of the arcade, that was very different from the front and rear. That has been addressed greater. There's a lot more rectilinear forms, less different arches and radius as in the previous proposal. Fourth one, to consider changes to the roof to reduce the volume and perceived height of the building, which is incorporating more gable and mansard roofs. This was a comment made, I believe, by Board Member Garagos and repeated, I think, by Board Member Malikian, that perhaps by using greater, forgive me as I'm recalling my notes, it's the mansard roof. That was the word I was looking for. The mansard roofs would be used, and a greater variety of roof forms to sort of add, again, more interest, more playfulness to the roofs. You'll notice here, as you compare it to the front elevation, there is a greater number in terms of the mansard roofs, the gable roofs, and the scallop parapet roofs. Again, with the shifting of the building itself from 3 stories to 2 stories, that has been a difference in terms of the roof line. Fifth was to submit a streetscape profile that includes an image of the project and photographs of all the surrounding developments on the same block and the adjacent blocks of the project site. The streetscape profile will be required in order to return for a redesign. And this particular, you'll notice on the board, so then this is something that can then be passed around. The applicant has provided the streetscape profile as requested by the board, as well as the virtual streetscape regarding the adjacent buildings along Foothill Boulevard that might have a similar massing and height as the current project. Item number 6, provide landscape planners that have enough soil area for the landscaping to have sufficient space to fully develop. Just to best seen in a landscape planner, greatest change from the previous one. The previous project had a 4-foot wide landscape planner from along the rear. In this case, they have widened that landscape planner to 5 feet. So there is an additional foot, which would be very standard in terms of the required landscaping width per code. Number 7, consider designing the project to have the lower tenant spaces approached from the south side of the building with additional access from this entryway. The current project proposal does not reflect that suggested consideration. And number 8, consider integrating sustainable design elements in the design of the building. Just to repeat from the project plans, the project has solar panels. These solar panels are proposed on the 2nd floor roof deck, as well as awnings along the south elevation. Other green building details include smart irrigation controllers in landscaped areas, additional installation, and high-efficiency tank-type toilets. In regards to CEQA, and that concludes staff's analysis of the board's comments in regards to the current proposal. In regards to CEQA, the environmental review, if you recall, the board decided to go ahead and continue adoption of the negative declaration to this current particular meeting. The project has gotten a little bit smaller from the previous one, as mentioned in the staff report. So the previous negative declaration initial study still apply, and it would need to be adopted prior to any determination made by the board tonight. As was mentioned by Board Member Malikian, 2 of the board members met with the applicant. All of the board members actually were given the opportunity to meet. 3 of the board members declined. And last but not least, considerations for the record of decision. This is a second submittal for final review. According to our latest adopted Design Review Board guidelines, because it is a second submittal, there are 3 options for the board. One would be to approve, the second would be to approve with conditions and or considerations, and the third one would be to deny. The return for a redesign option is not available to the board at this point in time. This project is the first of its type. There is no precedent. As such, the Design Review Board would essentially be setting a precedent under the new review process for Design Review Board and direction to the development along Foothill Boulevard. Staff really wrestled with this particular project in terms of making a recommendation. We felt that if we were to follow the letter of the law and to take a look at the conditions in black and white, and whether or not the project fulfilled those conditions, the project would fall short. However, if the board wanted staff to take a look at more of the intent, would be the gray area as opposed to black and white, staff felt ill-equipped to speak for the board and felt that the board should have the dialogue in order to make a decision. So in this case, staff is looking toward the board to see whether or not you feel that the project fulfills the conditions set forth in the previous review and meeting. As such, staff prepared essentially two records of decision. One would be to approve the project, and obviously based on any conditions or considerations that you feel are warranted. And the second alternative would be to deny the project. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
I just have one question, or if I may. And just reviewing this project, on February 12th, we have considerations and conditions.
Considerations and conditions, yes.
This board's attempt to get a two-story streetscape, was that a condition or a consideration?
Upon the tape and the condition and the record of decision,
Yes.
that was a condition.
That was a condition, and that passed 4-0. That was a unanimous decision.
In terms of
Our
the project itself.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Garagos.
Yeah, I didn't catch this which the rear setbacks changed. They said here that the rear setback had changed. I didn't catch that.
The rear setback went, previously the building was taller at 50 feet, so that you're allowed by code a setback of 2 feet. For every 2 feet of building height, you're allowed a 1-foot setback. The previous project had a 27-foot rear setback. Because the building has decreased in height to 45.2 or 45 feet 2 inches, the setback, allowable setback, has also been reduced. And the current project itself is going forward with a 22-foot 7-inch rear setback.
And that's the third floor wall, right?
That would actually be the second and third floor wall. This would be the flat building plane, as you see here.
Essentially, it's about 5 feet closer to the property.
Yeah.
Just under 5 feet
I
closer.
didn't catch that before. So.
Yes. Any other comments, questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Rodney?
Good evening, Chairman, board members, and city staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are here in the city of Glendale, as well as my home. We held a community meeting last month up at the site, and what we did was we gave a brief tour because of the existing conditions, to show the building, to show the slope of the lot, to show the proximity and the orientation of the residential to the south of us as well. And then we brought everyone back inside and gave them a presentation. The presentation primarily consisted of showing how the project has evolved, where we started at, where we've changed the alternatives, and where we're at today. And we actually had a pretty good turnout. We had about 50 people come up and comment. And the comments, there were questions, there were comments. We gave a written document that said, send this to me. If you put it in writing, I'll copy it and I'll forward it to the city as well on your thoughts. A large majority of the comments were related to the 2-story or 3-story building. We actually had one brave soul that got up and said he liked the building as designed, go ahead and build it. But that was not the majority, that was the minority type comment. As staff mentioned, we made significant changes, and it was significant changes from what you reviewed last time. So I'm not going to repeat them. but to reduce 6,000 square feet approximately, and to lower the building height to see the changes that have taken place is significant. We didn't want to come back just doing minor tweaks or minor modifications. And quite frankly, I think the changes that were made as a result of many of your comments have greatly improved our project. A few points I'd like to emphasize. I said them last time and I'll say them again. I think it's important to note we require no variances, we require no exceptions, no deviations from the code. Our project is fully code compliant. Its height, stories, setback, landscaping, parking all meets code. It's also consistent with the zoning ordinance in terms of uses, and it's also consistent with the City of Glendale's general plan. The context of the neighborhood. This area of Foothill Boulevard contains a number of nondescript buildings that are unexceptional in design. This building is different than those. Yes, we hope it is. We hope it's an improvement to many of the buildings that currently exist out there. We submitted a streetscape, and that gives you the context of our building adjacent to us as well. But it was interesting because it was pointed out to us to go look at, and I don't know if it was called a virtual streetscape, or to look at other buildings that are up along Foothill Boulevard. And there was a certain stretch that we were given. Now, we stayed on the south side of Foothill Boulevard in doing this. Although the code does not differentiate between the south and the north side of Foothill Boulevard, as you go further east, closer to La Cañada, you actually have 4-story buildings that exist. But we did not do that. We stayed on the south side. We looked at, and you can see in the illustrations, the building, the office building, on the corner of Rosemont and Foothill Boulevard, the southwest corner. We also looked at Osh, which is a blank wall that extends up high with no openings, and we looked at Office Depot. These are not buildings that we think are well designed, but these are buildings that exist out in this area. They are the context of what's up in this area. Velia talked about refreshing your memory about the environmental document. I'd like to also talk just briefly about that. When we first started off this project a year and a half ago, we looked at a number of different criteria that we were required to. One of those criteria was the traffic, because Foothill Boulevard, I'll be 3 more minutes.
We still have time.
Thanks. Foothill Boulevard is a very busy street. It's very traffic-oriented, vehicle-oriented. At some point, I believe it would be a great goal for it to be pedestrian-oriented. Quite frankly, it's not now. This project would make it more pedestrian-oriented than it currently is by a long stretch. But we did and performed a traffic study. There's a number of different criteria that's analyzed in doing an environmental document, and the conclusion was the project would not have a significant effect on the environment. Finally, for my part of the presentation, I kept speaking at our last hearings about how we're going to incorporate green building techniques. And I often would say it's secondary to what we're doing in terms of the design. Let's focus on the design, get the design to where it needs to get to before I talk about that. We are at where the design needs to get to, so I do need to talk about that. We have a bullet point. Velia touched on just a few of the things that we're doing in terms of the solar panels.
Mr. Carr, how much more time do you need?
Probably 2 more minutes. Solar panels, energy conservation, the smart irrigation systems, recycled carpets and flooring, Energy Star, low mercury lighting. Those are just some of the items that we've incorporated. There's also some dealing with water and how that's being treated for our building itself. I'll conclude my remarks. My time is up. We have the property owner. We also have the architect, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
Have any questions for the applicant?
Just something quick. What kind of feedback, or how do you think the design might have been changed or modified based on your discussions with the public, and what kind of impact do you think they had into what was up on the board?
I think over the course of time, it's kind of like a moving target, because based on who you're talking to as to what their thoughts and ideas are, we incorporate or we can't incorporate. To some folks, they wanted the left exactly as is. Obviously, we can't introduce that. We had people in the past that told us, for instance, and you see on some of our illustrations, that if you were to design the building that stayed out of our 45-degree envelope off the rear, then we can accept that because currently there are county standards that do that. Well, we did that. So that changed the building. We shifted the building forward. We reduced square footage of the building. Those are all things that were considered from community comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Larry Tyson, do you want to?
If you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
We have any questions for the landscape architect? No? We'll just keep your card aside. All right, so, and I understand the architect, Mr. Verge. We have any questions for the architect? Okay, well, we'll put this aside. If we need to, we'll call you back. So, okay, so let's start with the public. We're going to have 3 minutes for each speaker, and if you need more time, please let me know in advance. Ellen Cadwalder. And please state your name and your address, please, before you start.
Yes, my name is Ellen Cadwalader, and I live in La Crescent at 3616 3rd Avenue, within the 500-foot radius of this building.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I was going to say that anyone purchasing this property should have known that along with staying within the parameters of the codes and design guidelines, they must first seek to be compatible with the existing surrounding structures and neighborhood. And this should be no surprise that compatibility is a requirement, as is so clearly stated in the codes. That's part of the codes. However, the developer has continued to seemingly avoid seeking the input from the neighbors as to what is desired and compatible. And the one meeting that was finally held with the neighbors on March 19th was 3 days after the plans had already been submitted to the city. So there was no input that had been involved. We have signatures still of close to 400 people opposing this project, and countless letters and articles have been written in opposition. We know that the DRB meeting of February 12th said the mass and height were too great and sent the project back for redesign with the condition that it come back not more than 2 stories above foothill, as has been said. Yet there are still 3 stories. There's still a 3rd story. The design being presented here does not meet the conditions required by the DRB, is still not compatible with the existing surroundings, does not enhance the qualities of this area, nor is it desired by the neighborhood. And in addition, the staff report that states that this building will set a new precedent. So this building would begin to alter this area, significantly alter this area. We have a wonderful community that people have moved to, purchase property in, shop in because of what it is. And why would we want to be changing that? We do not want the mega structures of downtown Glendale in our foothill community. We have that 10 minutes away. We're very lucky. It's just 10 minutes away. We want to maintain our small town, village atmosphere, sense of community, with stunning mountain vistas that all are able to enjoy, and not just a few in large commercial buildings. So I think to just be very clear that voting to approve this project is a vote to begin to dramatically alter this neighborhood in ways that developers, not residents, seem to want. So I request this project be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it Nancy Cooming?
Good evening, members of the DRB and staff. My name is Nancy Camo, and I live in North Glendale in the 500-foot radius of this building. I'm going to be referring to the municipal code, and I made copies of the pages I will be referencing. May I give those to you, just in case you probably are familiar with them, but if you need them, I have them. I'm going to be referring to page numbers.
Thank you.
You wanted me to let you know that if I might run over a few seconds.
Okay. You have 3 minutes. So.
Oh, okay. The introduction to Title 30 of the Glendale Zoning Code, page 1, begins with this general statement under purpose and objectives. The objective of the zoning ordinance is to designate, regulate, and restrict the locations and use of buildings, structures, and land to protect residential, commercial, industrial, and recreation open space areas alike from harmful encroachment by incompatible uses. That is the overarching principle of the municipal code, to assure the viability of the city of Glendale and its various communities and neighborhoods. Under this umbrella, there are specific requirements and features for each zoning district, yet these are often governable by mitigating circumstances. There are ranges of heights and setbacks, for example, and this is where the safeguards built into the municipal code apply. This is where the DRB has direction to declare the need for revision in a developer's plan. Title 30-1007 of the Introduction to Title 30 describes regulations for all of the zoning districts in general terms. On pages 7 and 8, there are regulations that pertain to this particular project. Under paragraph E, Development Standards, it states that one of the purposes of this title and the establishment of the various zones is to maintain and enhance locally recognized values of community appearance. Paragraph J on page 8 refers to the height of buildings and states that to maintain compatibility with surrounding uses, the structural height of buildings must be regulated. And in addition to that, one of the factors to be taken into consideration is scenic vistas. Even though we do not have a view ordinance yet, the code does indeed address scenic vistas as a factor to be considered. Paragraph L, which refers to setbacks in landscaping, states the purpose of setbacks, open space, and landscaping requirements is to assure that an effective separation is provided between properties and uses to foster compatibility, privacy, light, air, ventilation, and so forth. In this Title 30 Introduction to the Code, as an overall policy for guiding decision-making, the importance of compatibility, privacy, scenic views, appearance, community values, and the need to regulate the structural height and placement of structures to guarantee these things couldn't be stated more clearly. Privacy and scenic views especially have not been recognized sufficiently as factors which need to be considered, yet here they are in the code for all zoning districts. The site of this project is on a strip of land zoned C31, surrounded by single-story buildings and single-family homes. The details for C31 are found in Chapter 3012 for commercial districts, which begins on page 33. Once again, a safeguard is contained within that descriptive paragraph. Commercial uses and building heights shall be restricted in order to assure compatibility with surrounding areas.
Ms. Kimball, you have 30 more seconds.
Okay. Page 39 charts the different zoning districts' development features and requirements. The maximum height for this zone is 50 feet. It does not say that the structure must be built to that or any other height. What it does do is limit the height to a maximum of 50 feet. The surrounding area informs the height and design of a project, not the developer. If the surrounding area is not compatible with the proposed design, then the height should be adjusted accordingly. In too many critical areas, this project does not adhere to the intent and purpose of the municipal and zoning codes or the urban design guidelines, and I therefore request that this project be denied. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one question. What is your address?
3611 3rd Avenue.
3rd Avenue. Where's that in relation to the properties? Are you south?
It's southwest.
Southwest.
It's in the 500-foot
Okay.
radius at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Lawler.
Hello, my name is Mike Lawler, and I live at 2717 Altura in La Crescenta. La Crescenta resident Sharon Raghavachari is unable to attend due to family obligations, as are many others because of religious holidays, vacations in conjunction with spring break. Sharon is a former member of the Crescenta Valley Town Council and was on the committee that spent several years gathering community input and crafting design standards for the unincorporated portion of La Crescenta. The Community Standards District, or CSD, was adopted by the LA County Board of Supervisors in February. Residents in the Glendale portion of La Crescenta feel pretty much the same way as our neighbors to the east do in regards to development along our shared resource, Foothill Boulevard. And we hope for a compatible look along its commercial corridor. So Sharon asked me to convey the following to the board. This project would not be acceptable in the adjacent unincorporated county community standards district for a C3 property in Westtown, where the majority of C3 zoning and properties with a compatible depth exist. It would fail the design standards in the following ways. According to the county CSD, the building height maximum is 35 feet, including roof forms. This project is feet. Driveways on the CSD, not more than 20 feet of the commercial frontage should be devoted to parking access, and this project has two 24-foot wide driveways. Roof design. On the CSD, buildings shall incorporate actual roofs and roof forms on at least 3 sides of the structure that are consistent with the declared style of the proposed building, being a new structure or alteration. But this project has large sections of flat roof with parapets. Retaining walls at rear property line. Walls greater than 8 feet in height should be constructed in 4-foot high increments above the first 8-foot, stepped back 2 feet, and planted and irrigated. The wall shall be constructed of masonry split-face block in earth tone colors in stone, stucco, or brick. Decorative masonry faced to favor neighboring residential property. But this project has a masonry retaining wall of 13.5 feet at the rear property line with no step backs. On the CSD, the front setback should be 20 feet. This project has no front setback. The landscape hardscape in the CSD should be 15% minimum with a 5% softscape. This project has 9.76% total. So in short, this project would be rejected if it were just a few blocks east.
Thank you. Kenneth Goldman.
My name is Ken Goldman at 3346 Rita Street, so I'm up the hill from the proposed development. The lively village shops look of the proposed structure for the Foothill Lumber site could be an asset to the Foothill Corridor. Unfortunately, the 2 pseudo-mission towers lend the structure more of an amusement park look than they provide an architectural boon to the area. That consideration, however, is secondary to the mass of the proposed structure and its consequent negative impact on the street and on the mountain views which give the Foothills community its unique character. Whether an investment is in stocks, pork futures, or in real estate, there is no guarantee of profit or even of not losing money. It is presumptuous for an investor, in this case a real estate investor, to expect municipal sanction for whatever that investor wants in order to maximize his profit. The developer and his staff have made abundantly clear their belief that their rights as owners of the Foothill Lumber property trump the rights of the rest of the community. A community, however, comprises individuals of common interest, not merely common location. Common interest requires consensus, which in turn requires compromise. The developer demands license to build an incompatible 3 stories. Personally, I would like to see development on the south side of Foothill Boulevard limited to a single story above the sidewalk, but I am willing to realistically compromise at 2, preferably with the second story set back from the first, which would allow a more human scale at street level. The first condition set by DRB2 at the February meeting on this project was a 2-story height limit. The revised plan unveiled by the developer at the promotional meeting he hosted on 19 March at the site in question, although an improvement over what went before, gives mere lip service to the DRB's instruction by slightly reducing the height at the ends of the building while maintaining an unacceptable overall 3-story height. The developer and his staff repeatedly have made much about their adherence to applicable code and zoning requirements, as if that were sufficient to grant them license to do as they please. They appear put out that there is a 3rd level of review that the City of Glendale has had the foresight to impose on new development. You, gentlemen, sitting here before me, the Design Review Board. It is not enough that a building is well constructed and fits its lot. It must also fit within its community. The plan as presented is neither compatible nor harmonious with the existing Foothills community and should be rejected, as should the negative declaration. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Wiseman.
Chair Malikian, board members and staff, I'm Sharon Weissman, 5001 Carolyn Way. It's in far north Glendale, north of the project site, a few blocks up from Foothill. In the time since the first concept submittal in July 2008, little has changed with the design. It still appears to be a concept rather than a building ready to be constructed. One glaring example, and I'm not a professional, but looking at the most recent set of plans, there's no restroom facilities noted in there. There's no apparent access to the solar panels, and there are other inconsistencies. The landscaping in the rear elevation appears to have been aged, with the trees showing quite tall, and the wall is showing something green covering it. And it reminds me of designs of Glendale parks where the concrete is shown in a green color, and then later when the park gets built, the council members and the public are surprised that it's just gray concrete. Despite the time elapsed since the initial concept, the drawings seem rushed and not properly thought out, and I don't believe we know yet what's exactly planned for this site. I urge you to not approve the environmental negative declaration and deny the design. I'm also going to read comment from Mountain Oaks resident David Myers, who couldn't be here tonight due to family commitments because of holidays. Good evening, Design Review Board members. This is our third public hearing on this particular project. It has been a long and tedious process, and it has been nearly a year. Actually, the developer said a year and a half. I didn't realize it even been going on longer. What is before you is still a design that I believe is unrealistic, a project that is out of place, out of context, and out of scale. Projects such as this are the very reason the Design Review Board process was implemented. I question the plans, whether this can ever be built, because the picture that is drawn doesn't make sense. For instance, at the edge of the parking lot, sheet A3, a 285-foot long, 5-foot high, solid masonry wall with lighting is depicted. However, sheet A9, rear elevation, in this picture, the wall is invisible, poof, camouflaged behind the trees. My question would be, are they really going to paint the wall that faces the neighbors to the south, all 285 feet of it, with a green paint or a camouflage pattern? This is doubtful. Other observations I've made related to this design are from the three-dimensional artistic rendition of the building presented to you this evening. The third floor facing west has no windows, but on the actual floor plan, windows are shown, sheet A5. No door access to the west roof for maintaining the solar panels. The artistic rendition only begins to demonstrate the enormity of this project that has been hastily rushed through the process. Projects are always bigger than we think they're going to be. As we have heard many times before, and we'll hear again, didn't know it was going to be that big. In conclusion, I respectfully request two actions. First, take the staff recommendation. Quote, while the project has been modified and improved from the previous design, the 2- and 3-story development maintains a relatively homogeneous appearance along its 260 linear foot length. The project steps down somewhat along Foothill Boulevard, just a couple more seconds, but appears as largely as a 3-story building at the south with little transition to the residential zone. Overall, the design is not well designed for its site and context. Therefore, as currently designed, the project remains incompatible with the surrounding context. This leaves the board little choice but to reject the project. Secondly, due to Glendale Municipal Code Section 30.47.030 I.3, building permit plan check and conformance design review, quote, a building permit plan check application may be accepted for a non-residential project which requires design review prior to final action by the review authority if the review authority authorizes proceeding to building plan check during the public comment period for the environmental documentation of a project. Therefore, I strongly urge you to not accept the mitigated negative declaration. Thank you, and that was David Myers, resident of Glendale, a Mountain Oaks area, which is south of the project. And thank you all for your
I
time.
would recommend you submitting that letter in so we would have a copy of that.
As a matter of fact, yeah, if you
can
don't
give it to
mind.
staff. Bill Wiseman?
Do you need a copy back? Okay, great, thank you.
Good evening, board members, staff, and the public. My name is Bill Weissman. I reside at, probably not surprisingly, 5001 Carolyn Way. Same as the previous speaker. I'm here tonight representing the Far North Glendale Homeowners Group. We are a member association of the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council. The proposed project is within the boundaries of our association, which includes the area north of Honolulu, east of Lowell, and west of Pennsylvania. And we're here tonight in support of the Highway Highlands neighbors in opposition to the proposed project, and we recommend that the DRB deny it. Our homeowners group participates in a lot of outreach activities. We do online outreach. We go door to door. We staff a information booth at the Montrose Harvest Market on many Sundays. We've been actively engaged in all of these outreach activities since the DRB preliminary review of this project in July of last year. We've spoken with hundreds of residents in our area about this project. The vast majority of them are opposed to it. The residents in our area do want to see this site developed, but with a building whose design is in harmony with the unique suburban and even semi-rural in some parts environment of the Crescenta Valley, whose mass and scale are compatible with the existing one-story commercial buildings adjacent to the site, and a building that won't block the existing mountain scenic vistas of its neighbors. When you last met on February 12th to consider two designs for this project, your decision was to return both of them for redesign. The first condition listed on the record of decision says, reduce mass and scale of the building to better relate to the surrounding context by having the project present a two-story streetscape to Foothill Boulevard. This has plainly not been done, and there apparently was no consideration given to the suggestion of pushing the entire project down. You also asked the applicant to break up the symmetry of the front elevation, to provide some consistency between the front and rear elevations, to make some roofing changes, perhaps by incorporating gable or mansard roofs, to make sure the landscape planters were big enough, to consider changing the design to have the tenant spaces approachable from the south, and to consider integrating sustainable design elements. And not being an architect, I would leave this to your professional judgment as to whether the applicant has met those conditions. I am very pleased to see the water-free urinals and the Energy Star bathroom fans, but my big question is, where are they going to go? The plans for this building as present do not show any bathrooms. I believe that's going to be an issue. If those plans were taken over to the building department over there in the other part of this building, they would be rejected. I mean, you got to have bathrooms. They have to be ADA compliant and a few other things. But I digress. Thank you very much for requiring the applicant to submit a streetscape, as it makes the incompatibility of this project very obvious with respect to the adjacent one-story commercial buildings. I would like to point out the perspective of the streetscape looking south is somewhat deceptive because it shows the tops of the utility poles appearing to be much higher than the roof of the building. I'm almost through, and you just need a few more seconds. In fact, the tops of those poles are 43 feet above the sidewalk. The highest point of the roof is over 45 feet. Also, the three existing buildings on the south side of Foothill, the applicant chose for comparison: Orchard Supply Hardware at 3100, Office Depot at 3030, and the third building is the 2600 Foothill building at Foothill and Rosemont, which is 1.5 miles away from the proposed project. None of those buildings are in the city of Glendale. None of those buildings would be allowed to build in the unincorporated area under the current community standards district. And in closing, I would just ask you, please take very seriously what the staff said about setting a precedent for our area, because future development is going to follow along behind your decision here. Thank you very much.
I have just one question, and you led me right into it by your talk about future development. In your discussions with your homeowners, members of your group and others, do you feel they had a realistic future-looking outlook on development on Foothill, and what would they like to see? I mean, do they understand that there will be development along Foothill? Oh yeah, absolutely. I think one of the previous speakers mentioned that probably a large number of people would like to see development on the south side restricted to one story. There's a fairly large number of people who don't feel necessarily that that's realistic, and that, 2 stories is a reasonable compromise. There are, I think, very few people we've spoken to that feel that 3 stories is a reasonable compromise. But there's a fairly wide mix of opinion. That's how I would. Thank you.
Sure. Sherry Stubbs.
My name is Sherry Stubbs, 3200 Fair Estes Street, La Crescenta, in the city of Glendale, maybe half a mile from the project. Bill touched on the main things that I was going to talk about: the building at Rosemont, the Osh building, Office Depot. They're not anywhere near close. The streetscape wouldn't apply. They're in the unincorporated area of the county. Glendale has no jurisdiction. On the pedestrian-friendly, if I read correctly, we have 260 feet of frontage, 2 driveways, 148 parking spaces. And we have pedestrians. They'd be taking their lives in their hands. I don't see how anybody would want to walk along that area when you've got cars in and out. 148. Not all at once, granted, but the possibility is there. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Church.
Good evening. My name is Robert Church. I live at 3547 Fairchild Street, La Crescenta, within the 500-foot radius of the building. And I'll be very brief. I wanted to thank the board for your concerns and the actions that you've taken so far. Sadly, I guess most of them have been ignored, the conditions that you suggested. This building still seems way oversized in scale and mass for the area. It's without consideration for the community. The plans were put in before they even talked to us again, which was one of your, I believe, recommendations to talk to the community before they came back. But my main point is almost already been hit by everybody. The 3 buildings that Mr. Kahn referred to, the OSH, the Office Depot, and the Rosemont building, are all very east of us, but also the slope goes down from the street exactly where every one of those buildings is. The first floor, the height of the overall building is way lower than what is on your boards there, because it slopes down. The first floor is below street level. So they're not really applicable to, what as examples, I guess you would say. Anyhow, I'm just mainly asking you to, as everyone else is, to consider the area and not have a developer dictate or define the skyline of Foothill Boulevard. Everybody in this room expects and wants development along Foothill, but it should be with a conceptual plan, it should be compatible with the neighborhood, and it should be much better thought out than to just impose this structure and set a precedent that will absolutely allow everybody else to come at you with this kind of a building. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Barbara Paul.
My name is Barbara Paul, and I live at 3632 3rd Avenue, which is just outside of the 500-foot radius of this building. This is my first experience with how the city works, and I'm so happy to be a part of it. I actually am very impressed with how thoughtful all the questions are and things that the community is saying. I think that I basically just wanted to say that from a humanistic standpoint, at our last meeting, there was the mother and the 2 teenage girls who were standing here crying. And I think that while, and not everyone may agree with me here, so actually the plans are significantly better visually than they were before. Yes, it is 2 stories on either side. Unfortunately, from a humanist, so anyone driving by, all of the people that drive to and fro here and there, for them visually maybe it is better. But for the people and the families that it affects on a day-to-day, hourly hour, hour by hour, minute by minute, the building is still 3 stories, and it's even closer now to the residents. It's even closer to the residents than it was before. So it seems as though there has been a disregard from a human aspect. Certainly compliance, as they said, there's a lot of gray area If it was black and white, they would fall short. There's all this gray area. Maybe they don't fall short. Who knows? We're setting a precedent. From a humanistic standpoint, it really does fall short because it's still just as big and still going to affect those families living right behind that property. And in fact, now it's even closer to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Richard Cross.
I'm Richard Kraus, 3369 Park Vista, La Crescenta. I just wanted to reiterate my strong opposition to the building. And it's not so much just the building, it's where it is. If that building were down on Brand or Glendale Avenue or Central or San Fernando, none of us would even be here. It's fine down there, but it's not on Foothill Boulevard. Number one, it's going to set a precedence. If you open this box, we're in big trouble, because that's going to be the incentive to continue on with more of these three-story buildings. And this is, 1.5, 2 stories is probably okay on the south side, but this thing is just too big. It's too massive, and it's just not. I'm not for it at all, and a lot of my friends aren't either. But they didn't come. Thanks.
Thank you. Is it John Buckman?
I'm also totally opposed to this project.
Can you state your name and address, please?
John Buckman, 3533 Mary Ann Avenue, which is right behind the project, by the way. Nobody minds a 1-story, maybe, big maybe, 2 stories. 3 stories is too high. Out of character for this wonderful small town atmosphere. Yes, development is normal, but this is way out of character for this neighborhood. I also have a little problem with the timing of this meeting. I mean, on the eve of a major holiday when a lot of people have left already from 5 to 7 p.m. to be out of town, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. when people were working at 5 p.m., somebody should have thought of that. The turnout would be twice as much if this were held a week from today. In any event, I'm totally opposed to this project as it now stands. We want max 1 or 2 stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Randy Stevenson.
Evening, board members. My name is Randy Stevenson. My offices are at 1111 North Grand Boulevard here in Glendale. I'm here to speak in favor of the project. I think that it's unassailable that the new design certainly is a marked improvement over the previous hearing that we were all at, especially in regards to 2 components. One, certainly the height of the structure, having reduced it roughly 10%, obviously brings down the massing of the site. The frontage being broken up into different components, I believe, gives the illusion of multiple structures there. Obviously, the perception is going to be, at least my view of the perception will be, that the mass and scale of the project have truly been reduced. Now, whether or not, from a square footage standpoint on the frontage, that will be apparent to everyone. The perception is the reality, and when they look like multiple buildings, you're going to have a very different feel. I would like to make an additional comment about any concerns about the precedent being set. I think something to consider with that is that I can't think, and I have not looked this up, but off the top of my head, of a site with the frontage that this site has. If you were to take a standard 50 by 150 lot on Foothill Boulevard and suggest to someone that they were going to construct 3-story buildings on it, certainly in this climate, those are projects that are not going to come before you given costs, site constraints. The site's unique. It allows for different components to it that other sites aren't going to allow. You're not going to see projects like this coming along every day. It's my belief that the reduction in the size is sufficient and certainly a better plan to warrant that this be approved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Rodney Kahn.
Once again, Rodney Kahn. To begin, there was a comment made that there was no consideration for pushing the project down. Let me assure you and everyone else, we took every comment that the board made and considered it. We drew plans. We explored different ideas and different alternatives, and they didn't work out. It wasn't that it was discarded or that it was ignored. That's very misleading and misleading statement. Secondly, maybe I'm confused. Buildings that we cited as part of this virtual streetscape were not in the city of Glendale. That was not the direction we were given. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. We were told on Foothill Boulevard, and we were given certain dimensions or distances and said, go look at it. And we talked about the project on Rosemont as being one of them. Now, if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I don't think I am. We're not trying to mislead. We are not trying to do anything other than follow what was suggested or stated to us, and that's what we've done. In one breath, it's mentioned you're not. This is the city of Glendale, that you've not incorporated, or you're not looking at what structures are in the city of Glendale. And the next breath, it's said to us, this does not follow the L.A. County standards, and then there's a list of criteria for L.A. County standards. Well, this is the city of Glendale. Glendale has its own standards. We're following Glendale standards. Have we reviewed those county standards? Yes, we have. Do we follow all of their standards? Absolutely not, because they're inconsistent with some of the standards that are in the city of Glendale, and this project's in the city of Glendale. A comment made about compatibility, and I made this as part of my presentation. Compatibility. If I looked at the buildings and structures that exist out there currently right now, and I wanted to design something compatible to those, I'd design a one-story concrete block building that has automotive uses in it. That's what I'd do. And that'd be compatible with a large majority of those buildings out there. A comment was made about timing of the meeting. It wasn't a good time. As you know, timing is outside of our control. I'll just conclude my remarks on this comment. We've made significant changes. It wasn't rushed. It was well thought out. It's a vastly improved project that we hope that you feel that way as well. And we hope that you can consider that and render an approval here this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Questions? Go ahead. No. I was. Mr. Khan, I was wondering if you can, in a sort of a short way, explain to us what was the process that led you not being able to shave off a story off of the building.
You mean in terms of pushing the building down? What I'd like to do is I'd defer to my architect, Varouj Saroyan, because he can speak to that clearer and better than I could, if that's okay.
Mr. Saroyan, if you can state your name and address, please, for the record.
My name is Varouj Saroyan, I'm not of record. I'll try briefly to explain why it was not possible to push the building down. Actually, we discussed this issue a couple of days ago with Alan, that why we cannot do it. Once we push the building down, assuming that, again, there will be some cantilevered portion of the building on the upper floors stretched towards south, and to underneath that to be utilized as a parking. That parking has an S2 occupancy that will be adjacent to that proposed push-down tenant spaces, approximately about 12,000 square feet. Now, code-wise, California code-wise, building code-wise, we cannot have any openings in between these two occupancies. So basically, we were going to build a 12,000 square feet closed box with no openings at all or transparency towards one side. And I don't think that would have been acceptable for anyone to build a box with no windows or openings. That was one of the major reasons why we couldn't do it.
But other than that, if you have to lose the square footage, is that a business issue that tells you that it's not possible and it won't make sense? What is the? I know that you're following allowable areas to build. a certain area that you can, according to the code.
It was not only that we're going to lose some square footage or area because of that. We have to push that cantilevered portion further north towards the building mass or volume. But in order to be able to reach to the lower subterranean level, we had to slope down that concourse level parking plane or floor. Therefore, we were creating a situation where when the height was measured from the lowest point of the lowered parking floor, we were going to be over 50 feet in height. That will kind of create a variance need for that, and we're trying to avoid that as well.
I have a question for Rodney, just one. Rodney, a couple of the speakers commented that the homeowners meeting, not what time of day it was or anything like that, but was actually scheduled after the plans had been submitted. Can you clarify that? Was that, in fact, the case?
Well, I can clarify the timing of a few things. First of all, the community meeting was one of the several meetings that we had. So to imply that that was the only meeting we had is incorrect. It's completely incorrect. We had meetings with different individuals. We had meetings with different businesses. We had different meetings with different groups over the course of this past year. We had the one community meeting. So to imply that that was the only time we had any contact is incorrect. In terms of the comments that we received, once again, Mr. Carter, we received the whole spectrum of comments. So in terms of being able to incorporate or the timing of the comments, it's to be able to get all of the input, be able to process it, and try to make some sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes. Well, I'm going to close the public session. So,
Staff received 4 letters or or emails, and I wanted to.
Yes.
There was a letter by a Ms. Lisa Paglucio, an email correspondence from Laura Aglanian, a letter from Ms. Faye Breslow, and correspondence from Sherry Stubbs. And these 4 documents were letters in opposition to the project.
Okay. Thank you. How do we want to go this? Would you like to start or before?
Maybe if I will, I'll jump off and say some things because then I'm going to do a good lot of listening to my peers and
Carter,
yes?
before you start, it is 6:30 and okay, all right. Please go ahead.
So I asked if the actual 2 stories facing Foothill had been a consideration or a condition. It was a condition. It was something that this board asked in our decision. We were clear. We spent a lot of time making that decision. I don't think we did it frivolously, so that is involved in my decision. Overall, it's almost like I'd like to. Okay, let's take a weekend and let's go to Arrowhead and work on Foothill redevelopment there because this is a real consideration up there. And as I said in my comments of February 12th, this street up there, Foothill, you'd like to think it's unique. It's not. There's Foothill Boulevards in Phoenix, in La Mesa, in Escondido. It's a long strip of haphazardly developed area that, having said that, has some charm, has some blight. So both sides are very correct in their the way they portray Foothill, and they all portray it for their own purposes. That's why we're here to kind of sort a little of that out. But the 3-story versus 2-story versus 1-story is a big part of it. It may be the decision maker in this as we go forward.
we have to, because it's not in our purview, reject all comments about the economic desirability or whether this is a good deal or a bad deal. I do remember that when mansionization was first an issue 14, 15, 18 years ago in Glendale, the Board of Realtors at all of the meetings thought these huge houses was a great idea. Lots of square footage, big price tag. This was the coming thing. So all of that is out of the discussion for this board member. So I'm going to listen, especially to my two board members that had a meeting with the applicants and discuss some design details.
Thank you. Mrs. Zerfian, before you start...
Actually, I rather hear Mr.
Okay, but...
Because you had a meeting with...
I would like to hear you, as being a LEED certified, I would like to hear you commenting on some of these. So if you can think about that, I would like to hear that from you. Mr. Gergos?
I did have a meeting. It was very helpful to meet directly with the applicant, the architect. It was sort of a way of not having to go over particular things in front of everybody spending time. So it was very helpful. Just to address one thing, the whole idea about the streetscape was that what's very difficult about the position that we're put in is that the city doesn't really have a sort of a design guideline for how Foothill is supposed to be done. And we're tasked to sort of create this out of whole cloth with this project. And then what's really frustrating on top of that is that the city council decided to give us fewer numbers of times that we can come back and ask them to change it. So when you put all that together, it puts us in a very bad position, I think. You know, we've done residential houses that there's quite a bit of uniformity to that have come back 3 or 4 times just in the times that I've been here, just a short period of time I've been here. So the idea that this project could come through, and on top of the fact it was just frustrating because it took 2 cycles to get it to a point that it should have been very early on. And I think what's unfortunate about what's submitted is that it should have been the previous submittal, because I think we were very clear on those preliminaries, and I was glad that the applicant brought in the preliminaries to talk about that. And I think we were trying to tell them that you need to get to something that's more sympathetic to the community, and you need to break it up. And they didn't follow that. So they presented an application which essentially was skin on the same building that they had in the preliminaries. So they wasted one of their review times on trying to push through footage that we told them was going to be very difficult to do. That was their choice to spend the moments they had before this board. So I think that's unfortunate, because like I said, we're tasked to essentially create the future of Foothill, or at least the beginning steps, seeds to what Foothill is going to be. So I don't like to being put in that position, but I'm here and we're tasked to do that. So consequently, I wish we had the previous rules where this could cycle 2 more times. I think it probably needs 1 or 2 more times to go through. And I think it probably could be successful, and I think we could come to a true understanding of what this building should be, consistent with when it is. It is the first building that's going to happen. The Toyota dealer, you guys heard all about the Toyota. It was a big thing on the other board. You know, it's not the first time this has happened. So there's, you know, the board, these design review boards are tasked with trying to figure out, you know, what is Foothill. I mean, the city is commissioning commissions to come up with what, you know, Foothill is, and we're asked to do it right now in 2 or 3 goes at a building that should have been this way on the previous submittal. So I wish we had the previous way where we could cycle this again, but I think the building is not at the position where I could support it. I do think it is a starting point, and it could be something very similar to what it is, possibly. But we were very clear, I was clear very early on, I thought the 3rd floor was a tough call, and when you came back in with a full 3rd story on it, you know, you wasted an opportunity there, I think. You know, I think you sort of burned some bridges with people. But, so that's where I am on. I think this is where it should have been on the submittals, and I think we could have possibly come to something by this point, if that's the way it had started. So
here goes, from my understanding, and I don't know the direction that this board is taking, we only have two choices.
Which
So
is
if-
my point. I'd be forced to because of the position we're in.
Okay.
With the amount of reviews, I would be.
Now, I would like to ask to comment on the areas and kind of be specific on the areas that you felt that it really needed improvement and be, a little bit more directional about the certain areas so that we can kind of
I don't know if
pass
you
it
want to do that
along.
now or
Let's-
at the end. I mean, or is it,
well,
wrap it up.
it's
What do you wanna do?
yours. I mean, if you want, we can wait until we all comment and we can go back and have a discussion. It's up
You
to
could probably be more productive if
Okay.
I've gone through, but I might can do it
Okay.
now, but it doesn't.
Okay, well, would you like to? I'll leave Jean-Pierre. Okay, well.
I have, as you know, I just joined this committee board, and for the last week I've been reading and watching all the tapes for the last few of them, and I appreciate that everyone's comments, and there's so many points. I think we could work it out. I agree with Mr. Garagos and Randy, and I wish we had more time, but we have to stay, remember, within the code and the zoning and all that. So I wish we had more time, but I will do my best to give my comments. I do have a couple of questions to the architect, if you don't mind.
We're going to open up the public session. Yeah.
Okay. Is for the height of the building, I know you gave an explanation regarding the height of the building. Is that, I feel like, is that your final? You need more time to review it, if you could reduce it, if there's room to reduce the height of the building furthermore, or reduce the square footage or anything, or you need more time to review the plans, the design, if there is room to reduce it to make the balance.
Well, when we're talking about the overall height of the building, that we could push down the building.
Correct.
You have to keep in mind the southerly part of the building, which is part of that open parking facing towards south, is open to sky. And the height will be measured from the lowest point of any grade adjacent or abutting the building. At that point, when we create all these sketches and we went through alternatives, we came to a point that if we had to push the building down, because we had to reach to the lower levels as well, and we had to lower the parking, the concourse parking level, I should say, that would create a height that was going to being over 50 feet, and that will trigger a variance that we're not ready to go there.
Do you have a civil engineer involved?
There is no need to have
design?
a civil engineer for that. It's not a civil engineering issue because the grade that I'm talking about is the concrete deck, which underneath that will be parking again. There is no grading issue involved with that. It's just a part of the structure that we're talking about.
And another question regarding that wall height in the back, retaining wall height, that one of the homeowners had a comment. Would you answer about that? Clarify to them the reason of the...
Well, currently, the existing wall height is somewhere close to, at some areas at some point, is close to 14 feet in height.
Existing.
And we're reducing the height of the existing wall, which is going to be removed from there anyway, because the new wall will act as a retaining wall. And the new wall height at some point will be somewhere close to 9 to 10 feet, which is lower than the existing wall height.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Session is closed. Do you want to wait for your comments, or do you want us
I'm
to...
done. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay.
No more comments.
I guess it's my turn.
It's your turn.
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for taking this so seriously and coming up with so many comments and thoughts and sharing it with us. I think it helps us all to really see both sides and be able to see different points of views. Because this one is a very, very tough one, because we all like to see our city to grow and to become a better city. However, there are very tough decisions to be made. I spent a lot of time again, although I've been reviewing this project twice. I went to the site again and took a look at the site from both sides. I think from a perspective of those who live right behind the site, the wall once again seemed like if someone improved that wall, would be a good improvement for those houses. Plus that one of the things that was brought up by one of the opponents was that if someone buys this lot, they have to consider that they can't build a 3-story building, or they can't do certain type of an improvement. I think it can be looked at from both sides, in the sense that I, as a person, I wouldn't have bought a house that is adjoining a commercial zone for the same reason, because you'll never know what might happen in future, because other people have rights too. And I'm trying to bring up both perspectives for people to see each other's points of views. So there are ways we have had people who've come to our before our board and said that our lot is very small, so we have to build a second story. I think I have looked for a lot of houses, trying to find the right house for myself and my family, and those are some of the considerations that I make. If does the lot have enough room to grow, or if I want to add another bedroom, do I have the room, or if I have to go up one level, does it make sense or not? So you could look at that kind of an approach from both perspectives, and that's why it makes the decision for this particular project very difficult. I think because of the reasons that Dr. Georg.
Yes, Doctor.
Dr. Georg, Mr. Georg mentioned, it's even harder for us, because all of a sudden we have to make a decision, yes or no, and we could have probably made it a lot sort of productive if we could have maybe made some more changes. I think at this point, since we need to make that decision, I like to, I don't know if we're going to go one more time, sort of rebuttal.
Well, I think we're just going to state our thoughts, and then if we're going to talk.
Okay, so maybe I'll keep that kind of resolution to the end. But I think since you asked me to address the lead or sustainability issues, I think these points are all good points, but I think the whole issue of sustainability is a whole approach and attitude towards building. It's at the end of the day, you can make some points. They're very preliminary. You have to really look into how all those. Some of them are very clear, like recycled carpets and use of types of mercury lighting and other things. But I think some other ones, like reducing energy and high efficiency irrigation systems, those are things that you need to really see how they're implemented to be able to address or evaluate them. So I think there are good directions there, but it's the next level that will make the change. And also I think there needs to be some sort of, it's all about the right approach to architecture. If we all kind of remembered what made all those good buildings that have sustained their lives as good buildings, and they're good today, and they were built years ago. Some of the earlier buildings are better sustainable buildings than the ones that claim to be sustainable today. So I think it all depends what the next step could be in the implementation.
Thank you. Well, I had an opportunity to meet with the architect, and I came up with somewhat of a solution to lower the entire three-story building down to be able to accommodate them with the square footage and address the 2 and the 3 stories. So I was really interested to hear the reasoning behind of not being able to do that. First of all, I was glad to see a very good change or a positive change from the previous. So I started, I think they're headed in the right direction. After we met, as the architect explained, I was fairly clear about the code reasons why he was not able to do. So again, I still have that concern of the 3-story, but as far as why he cannot do it, I understand. One of the concerns that I have right now, and obviously we're talking very general right now. I think the timing, we don't have the opportunity to return this for redesign and give specific directions of how to modify this to, I think, work to both the developer's benefit and the public's benefit. One of the things that I've noticed as far as the massing, and I've mentioned this before, that along Foothill, west to east, there's a substantial slope of the site. And as you drive down going towards east, you can literally see the building stepping down, 1-story structure stepping down. And I'm glad that I'm seeing the lower stories, a 2-story, but again, my concern was the 3-story in the middle. Now, at some level, they have tried to work that out, and have tried to step this down. And if I don't know if you guys noticed, in this section, originally, the entire building was pretty much on a flat level, whereas now the building is actually stepping down with the foothill. I'm glad that they've addressed that, but I was hoping that would be addressed on the building itself also. But when we were leaving, when we met, and I expressed my concern, and I'm going to bring my concern again, is the same thought that has gone through the foothill project, foothill elevation. I wish the same stepping occurred from south to north, similar to the property that is sloping from west to east, sloping down, and it's sloping from north to south. So I wish that the same thing by lowering the building would have solved that. So that was one of my main concerns when I left, and I've been thinking about how to resolve that, and I wasn't able to come up with a solution on that. But one comment that I want to make, and I have not had a chance to fully read the guidelines that has been adopted recently, and one of the conditions that, if I'm correct, was the roof line, and it's encouraged to have actual roof line rather than flat roofs. And I'm not sure if it actually works for your benefit to have that on the south side of the foothill. I think having a flat roof, I think it definitely helps reduce the mass of the structure. So therefore, having a flat roof, it automatically, you go towards more of a modern architecture, more of a contemporary, newer look. And I don't know, maybe that was one of the solutions that it would have worked here, that it would have eliminated at least 4 or 5 foot of additional height of the mansard and other elements there that is needed to make this architecture work with the roof lines and other elements there, which I think the roof line is very interesting. But again, I think the 3-story is the key, and I still remember the neighbors that walked here and they expressed their concern. I'm very cognizant about that, and having the building compensated for the loss of square footage by being pushed back and the setback being reduced, I think that is not a positive direction. So I wish that was addressed at some level. But I think if we had another run, we would have seen that, and we would have been able to kind of, and I don't know if that's the route the developer would have want to take. Maybe this is the direction that it's more beneficial for the developer. Couple of other comments and things that I've noticed, and I'm not lease certified, or I'm not knowledgeable about, fully knowledgeable about the efficiency of the usage of solar and other, but I am reading quite a bit on that. And one of the things that I've noticed is the awnings have been placed randomly, and they've been placed on the north side, which you hardly get any sun. So what I would recommend is try to go through that and be able to address those properly. And on the south elevation, they're being randomly placed where if awning is being used to create shading and lower the heat gain, I would probably come up with a solution that would address, the awnings would address most of the windows, or somehow some elements there that truly the awnings would work to your benefit rather than being aesthetic. It would be more of a functional element rather than aesthetic element. The other thing is, having been lectured by a lot of photovoltaic experts, there's a substantial amount of photovoltaic panels are needed, and being set flat on the roof, it's really not functional. It needs to be facing a certain direction at a certain angle, a certain amount needed to accommodate certain usage. So by the time we're done with this, you may not have enough, and so that if the next step needs to come in, I would recommend having a consultant address those to be able to place in a proper amount of a solar panel being placed with a structure casting a shadow over the solar, most of the day. It's really not the most feasible location for that. So as far as, that's why I wanted to hear, as far as the lead certified expert here, that what he would think, and so that that's what I found. But as far as the overall design, I think it has gone towards the right direction. It is unfortunate not able to lower the building to have a 2-story all throughout the foothill, but a lot has happened along foothill that it has created an interesting facade. I would probably take it one step further, try to minimize the 3-story impact as much as possible, and not add additional elements there that accentuate the 3-story elements, such as the domes on the either side and the atrium, maybe create balconies and other elements that really doesn't say I'm a 3-story and I can step back, and other elements there. Add, and those things are what I would have kind of taken this, directed the architect go towards, but that's where we are. So I don't know if you guys want to continue on this, or you want to have any other.
Mr. Howard? Scott?
Oh, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sensing the direction you're going in to enable me to go in a certain direction, literally transportation-wise. I don't know, one, if you have any questions for me, and two, I do have a couple of comments that might assist you in your further deliberation.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
I wanted to comment on one item a speaker raised, and that was this notion that you should reject the environmental document because if you fail to do so, the applicant may submit an application for a building plan check. That is not required. If you are moving toward a denial of this project, you do not have to consider the environmental document. Environmental documents are not required for denials, number one. And number two, even if you were to consider the environmental document, you still would have to make an affirmative statement that would allow the applicant to move forward with submitting plan check. And from the record of decision that I've reviewed from February and from the conversation we've had here, I have not heard this board make an affirmative statement that allows the applicant to move forward to submit for building plan check, notwithstanding your discussion. And I don't believe that's going to happen here. So my recommendation would be if you are moving toward denial of this project, that you not even rule or make a decision on the environmental document.
Thank you very much.
Wave to me, thanks.
Well, I mean, it's up to you.
Why, 'cause I screamed I was too loud?
If
Okay.
anybody
Didn't mean
wants
to
to
be
point
loud.
it out, we've all said our piece, so. And go ahead and.
Like I said, I think it's unfortunate because it should have had two more rounds. I mean, but we're not allowed to do that. That's what I think is so unfortunate about this.
Well, what would you have done if, let's say, if we would have had another opportunity to see this? What direction you would have given to the developer? So that
Well,
that
I hope they resubmit because I think it's on its way to becoming something. But I think there's some things that they could address if that's what you're.
well, specifically the areas that you feel that it needs improvement, and do you feel that the 3-story is still an issue? Do you like the architecture? Do you see the details working for the benefit of the project or not? Or I don't know.
I think the 3rd story is still a hard sell as it has been. I think it's even from early on. I said if there is one, it's going to be a small component of it. I can see in the massing it has now that I think possibly half could be 2nd floor if it works. But I think it's starting to push too far in the back. So I think it's getting. That's an aspect. So that's one aspect of the 3rd floor. I do think. It sort of bothered me about the band, the arcade, because the arcade really isn't an arcade. You can't walk under it. It's only 4 feet wide, and the post takes the rest of the dimension. So I do think that the arcade element, I think they were sort of using as this unifying element, and I think it just works in contrast to what it's trying to do. It's trying to be separate buildings, which was the concept to try to break up the volumes. And I think it's trying to unify it with an element that's a little bit too strip mall-like. That's what you do on a strip mall when you want to have signage, area for signage and stuff. So I think it undermines the fact that they're trying to do interesting architecture up above. So I think if you had straight wall there that emphasizes the nice massing they have above, you would have signage, area for signage. And so I think that's something that could be done away with, and I think it would be a positive. The other thing is they're trying to go towards a historical style, but doing windows that have no divided lights. So that would make me question, should it be divided light? And I would sort of be leaning towards it, again, because of the level of finish they were trying to do on the elevation. They're trying to evoke a historical style. The entry element, I think, is a nice set piece. And in some ways, you're making separate buildings, essentially, so it could be a set piece. But it looks like it's being crowded out by these other buildings. And if it was the center, if there needed to be and ultimately had to be a 3rd-story component, and it was smaller, then it would be embellishing that as the entrance in some way, and I think the massing would be more supportive of it. I'm not saying that there should be a 3rd floor, but that is making it not as successful. And also, I think there's the same level of interest and detail that is on the front facade needs to be done on the rear facade. I think the rear facade is kind of a after fact, which in some places could be okay. Sometimes you can have a back of a building that isn't as attractive, but this one is really going to be visible, especially when it's up that high. It's the first building of that size on the southern side. There is a difference to how you see the building on the south side of the street, and I think you have to be sensitive to that. what I'm getting back to, which as I said originally, was what's difficult about this is that we're sort of asked to create the first large structure on the street with very little guidelines very quickly, which I think puts us in a very unfortunate position. And we've been tasked to only look at it two times, and this is the second time, and it's not there yet. So that's what's very difficult about this review. It's not that I'm not supportive of the project. I am supportive of the idea of the project, just that it's done properly. So those are just a few items. I do think more pitched elements also, if that's just adding on, more pitched elements, especially on the rear.
Thank you.
I have a few remarks to make. Let's say if we had another chance to come back, I would have recommended, unfortunately I wasn't here from the beginning, but I would have recommended, I maybe would have made a difference as a solution, as a recommendation, maybe that third story, maybe if we would have offset it maybe 10 feet, I think the community would have had that impact as a facing three-story building on Foothill, and take that entire third story facing Foothill and push it about 10 to 15 feet further in. And I think it would have made a big difference, and that would have balanced to keep the developer happy and the community happy, and we didn't have that impact from the street. If you standing on Foothill and looking straight with the angle, you wouldn't notice that third story impact. I don't think the back, and then I would do the same thing in the back too. I would have recommended to offset it. I don't know if if we're going to be denied or whatever, how we're going to decide. And then also there are issues that little issues, questions like the walking around the space between the columns. I see the columns are sitting right on the property line. I don't know if that's a mistake. Or is that, I don't know if that was an error, drawing error. The columns are sitting right on the property line. Is that allowed?
Actually, with respect to the new California building code, the columns can encroach into the sidewalk as well. And I think that's the way we're showing it.
What's the distance between the face of the wall and the column?
We have clear 4 feet as is required.
4 feet?
Yes. That's the reason we have pushed the column further towards the sidewalk.
Mediator, okay.
You need to.
Yeah, open. I'm just opening up or not opening up.
Oh, we were supposed to open up, sorry. Okay, thank you. Open and close.
Well, as we close, looks like we're coming to some kind of closure. I would concur that the third story for me is a tough sell, and I do acknowledge that it's us five. In the absence of guidelines from the city about Foothill Boulevard, we're taking a bold step. We're a little unfortunate for the applicant and their representatives. They talk about larger buildings. Unfortunately, they happen to be big box buildings, so that higher storied development on this street is not the norm. So we're operating, even our considerations are operating in a void. And I'm not prepared to make a decision in favor of the third story. But my colleagues, Mr. Zurfan raised a wonderful point, because I was going to say, I'm going to defend the people on the south side. But in point of fact, as he relates, when you buy a property next to a commercial development, hey, if we weren't here, they could put a drive-in theater, show Terminator 6 times a night. So your rights as a homeowner you have rights, but they go as far as the other guy's property line. But I am not prepared to go the three-story move. That I think ultimately I'd like to hang it on the hat that I'm protecting the people on the south side, but really what I'm saying is I'm not prepared to set a three-story on this property.
First when I saw this last iteration, I think, first of all, the building has really improved a lot. And so I commend the architect and those who are responsible for it. I think the biggest question is the 3-story versus 2. And I thought when I saw a 3rd story, still a 3rd story, I thought that was a recommendation. And then once I looked at the notes, it was a condition. But I think still the building could have, if I was to answer your questions, I think I would have liked to see the building substantially 2-story, and then if there are some 3-story parts to it, then it makes it more believable that this is a solution that in a scale can be reflective of its sort of community. If I had my way to say let's have this come back one more time, I would have pushed the center of the building down where the two towers are, because what it does is basically it allows the building for those pieces that need to be tall, and those that need to be sort of more horizontal to be horizontal. I think we put 3 different 3-story buildings next to each other, and that's why the mass never has a chance to say that I'm a 2-story building with some parts of 3-story, or like the way our new board member, which I still have to remember your name, I'm sorry.
JP.
JP. That he mentioned so clearly was maybe a setback or something that tells the first impression to be a 2-story building with some parts that are 3 stories.
Well, one concept to implement your thought would have been literally remove the 3rd floor, the archway, and then create a balcony or a walkway between the.
Yeah, I think I would have felt a lot more comfortable looking at this building if for one thing that was sort of present, and that the first impression is the 2-story building. Then the other thing is that I think I would have simplified some of the volumes that have the parapets as a straight line. They seem to be more successful in terms of letting those pitched roofs to be pitched roofs and not creating another sort of piece into the whole mix that talks about the very traditional Spanish architecture with, and I'm referring to those parapets that have a form of these arches on top of it. I think there's still kind of a bit of a confusion in terms of the simplicity of the language of the building. And then my third point was just what I said: simplify the language. And then at the end, I like to say that still the building has really improved a lot, but I don't know how to move forward not being able to have the building come back. I mean, I can approve the building if all these changes can be done, but how it can be done, I don't know. It cannot. I cannot see a way that I can say, yes, let's move forward and
that's
make
an interesting question.
Changes that can really make it work. I see my hands tied right there.
I actually have a. Yeah, go ahead.
Someone has a question, but I just
I made a mistake to let the architect speak. I'm not supposed to, unless it's a life and death and something that we've completely missed. I don't know who raised their hand, but
sorry, I was 20 minutes late because of the freeway up at the.
we've heard all the kind of. We're about to make a deliberation. So I think everything that needs to be said has been said. So we know exactly what the public wants. My question is, how would an applicant or an architect or developer develop a property line block wall that they're proposing 15-foot, 16-foot, be placed on the property line and be plastered without encroaching into the properties and be able to do that without getting the permission of the neighbors. If they do not give that permission, I should have asked that from Scott Howard. I remember. No, I had a question.
Ultimately, they would need permission to go on to the adjacent property. They could instead come up with some sort of foundation or footing that would the property line wall would essentially be on their property. It wouldn't be exactly on the property line, half and half.
Right, but my question is, you have a 16-foot wall or a 15-foot according to the architect, and they're proposing to plaster that or
Yeah, that's right.
pour it in a solid concrete, colored concrete with textures and
Right, or perhaps reinforced concrete masonry units that are rough face. That's also something that's utilized, which doesn't require a finish from the other side because it's already essentially pre-finished.
Okay, because
If that's what you would recommend, we can put it in the notes.
I think whatever they do, if they do decide to go that route, I think that would be their only solution, because I don't think any of the neighbors would give the permission for them to get onto it. And the way that it's shown, I don't know if it's being plastered or any kind of a finish being placed onto the block wall. I don't think they're going to be able to get onto the properties.
That's a good point, and we'll put that in the notes, and we'll also put it in the notes that another material that wouldn't require plaster would be acceptable to the board.
I think that would be a lot more desirable. Okay. I think it's fine.
But before you move on,
Yes.
we really appreciate the specific direction that you've given. It really helps staff and all those who are attending and watching to understand the basis of your decisions. So thank you for that. We would like a couple of clarification questions. We know this is a fairly complex project, and while you've listed a lot of issues that you have with it, there are a couple that we've heard that we would like a little bit more clarification on. One is there's been a lot of discussion, and the condition that was made at the previous meeting regarding that the building should be 2 stories as appears from Foothill Boulevard. As part of your discussion tonight, you've started to address how the building appears from the south side, and I know Board Member Melekian mentioned the importance of stepping down the volume towards the south side. There was other mention of the importance of providing the same amount of architectural detail, variety, and attention towards the south side. Would you say that that's a secondary priority for the board or an equivalent priority to the Foothill Boulevard?
I always like to see consistent detailing. I mean, if you have a condition such as columns and support for a structure that is being used on Foothill, I would be it would be something similar to what I would want to see in the back, and that's my opinion. And so I think that's what Mr. Garagos was going with, and that's just one of the items, and there's other elements there.
There's a level of interest with the roof forms that are on the front that I think the back could benefit from.
And as far as the view of the massing from the south, obviously with the slope, that's more challenging for the architect and developer. There was a mention of step backs from the south and some reductions from the south. Would that reduction in the massing appearance be as important to the board from the south view as it is from the Foothill Boulevard?
I think it depends on the amount, if they're still going to be proposing the 3rd floor, and if the setback is still going to be reduced in the back. I mean, all those things are exacerbating the impact of the 3rd floor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Stephanie, I actually have I think it's sort of a qualitative question of your work at the counter and with the applicants. When we set conditions and considerations, and there's a lot of them in the, we actually did a lot of work, or somebody did, at the last February 12th session here. I'm wondering, does that work against us when there's a condition that's the number one condition, it's a fundamental condition, 2 stories, 3 stories, And that's not actually addressed, but maybe a lot of work has been done on other things. Should we be briefer in our considerations and when there's something as dramatic as that?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question, because this is something that staff is consistently working on. As you complete your work, we then continue to work with the applicant to meet the conditions. It's very useful to us and to the applicants if your priorities and concerns are as clearly spelled out as possible. And staff and the applicant also we view the tape if we need to go back to very often. As much as possible, we rely on the wording of the conditions. And if you recall in the previous meeting, what we tried to do is draft those conditions while we were in the meeting so that we can read them back to you. What's interesting is that in hindsight, we can always tell if there's more information that we could have used. So if you could be mindful of that, more detail and a greater sense of what your priorities are is very important. Before I let Tim add to this, one more thing. Is that because there is a lot of considerations and a case-by-case basis, you give some very thoughtful attention to each design. Part of what we struggled with, and Vilja very articulately mentioned, is that even though it was a condition that was very specific, we did not quite understand if, like I think Board Member Baladian mentioned, if the project was, say, 2 stories with some pieces rising up, that would also be acceptable. So that there was we heard a more subtle discussion from the board than was reflected in the condition, even though the board was very, very strong and very firm when stating that condition.
I think one of the problem mistakes that we made was that we said we don't want you to lose square footage, but keep it 2 stories, because that, I think, created some difficulties and confusion with regard to the heights and how you can, where the heights are counted from, pushing the building. It made it very complicated, I think. But if we had said 2 stories, no question about it, definitely you lose square footage. Maybe that would have been clearer.
It would have made it more clearer for us
Mr.
as
Carter,
well.
in the past, I believe, I remember that we have had projects, smaller projects, that we had sent, and this was prior for the main change, that we had specifically requested certain conditions to be met, and they were going to come back as a return for redesign. And once we received that, they were not done, and we didn't even open the project, and we just returned it until those items were addressed. So there has been cases, and depending on the direction that the board wants to take, we have that option that we can, I don't know if we can continue it until that condition is addressed, or, and I'm not sure in now the new direction that the board is taking, and the options that we have available for us, if that is one of the options for us not to open the case and be able to return it until that specific comment, if we are very specific about.
Well, I can respond to it from 2 different directions. One is that when the new design review process was being discussed by the City Council, one of the things that the City Council was really focusing on was to remove this whole, what seemed to be perpetually happening in the past, that some applicants kept pretty much trying to wear out the design review boards by not responding to everything, responding to some things. So that's why the city council actually looked at the option of coming back 3 times as opposed to two times, and they wanted very specifically to limit it to 2 times to remove that option. The other thing that we have noticed over the last year is that we go through a lot of discussion with not this particular applicant, but a lot of applicants when you've given us discussions or conditions that we go back and forth. And if they know that they can give it a try, it's much easier for them to even not listen to staff when staff says, we understood the board to mean this. They'll say, well, let's put it on the agenda. And that'll actually tend to elongate the review process. So we're not encouraging it to go that way.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
I'm sorry, just one comment based on what Board Member Carter said. When you approve a project and you set some things as conditions and some things as considerations, those have, especially the conditions, have a great deal of finality to them. But when you're returning it for redesign, something that you might feel very strong about, if the applicant comes back with a completely different design, it might render, that whole issue that you felt strongly about moot. So, in a sense, all those things, when it's returned for redesign, those things are all in play again. And, the board might feel very differently about a certain remark they had made previously in the context of a whole new design. So it just doesn't have the same finality, and I wouldn't
Thank you. So the answer is yes and no.
Well, I'm just saying I wouldn't, you're not tying our hands, don't worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now we need...
We need a motion. And you know what would help, maybe? If staff would just review the motions that because this is going to move to our fine fellows in another building, in another floor here. Repeat the options that we have as motions.
Again, the options you have are one to approve the project, whether with or without conditions, or to deny the project.
So, okay. And Mr. Chairman, are you looking for a motion?
Did you want us to?
I need a motion. I can't make the motion.
Did you want us to read the draft record?
Yes.
For you as well.
That would be 2. Now, if you feel that the project, addresses the board's concerns, you elect to approve it whether or not with conditions, you can use the following as a record of decision. Overall, the building mass is primarily located along Foothill Boulevard and away from the residential properties to the south. As modified from the previous design, the current proposal appears to step down along Foothill Boulevard to better reflect the topography of the site. The contemporary interpretation of the traditional revival style appears consistent throughout the project. While the project is significantly larger than the existing surrounding buildings, it steps down to 2 stories on both the east and west ends along Foothill Boulevard. In addition, the rhythm of the project appears compatible with the existing development pattern. At the south, the building is buffered by landscaping and a setback greater than 20 feet from the south property line. This would be if you choose to proceed. If you choose to proceed with a denial, the draft motion reads that while the project has been modified and improved from the previous design, the 2- and 3-story development maintains a relatively homogeneous appearance along its 260 linear foot length. Project steps down somewhat along Foothill Boulevard, but appears largely as a 3-story building at the south, with little transition to the residential zone. Overall, the project is not well designed for its site and context. Therefore, as currently proposed, the project remains incompatible with the surrounding context. And these would just be 2 draft records of decision. And you can modify, and we would modify that to reflect the discussion that you had as well.
Okay, well, I'm reading this, and this was prepared by staff, and it just to reiterate what you said, the project appears largely as a 3-story building at the south with little transition to the residential zone. We had condition number 1 that is in direct contradiction to that sentence. So with that in mind, I'm going to move denial of this project.
Now,
Yes.
You're moving denial. I would assume that the board would not like to address the negative declaration as suggested by our city attorney.
No.
Okay, so that said, I have a motion by Board Member Carter for denial. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
By Board Member Garagos. In terms of a roll call, Board Member Baladian.
Second. No.
Pardon?
Second. No. Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. Board Member Carter.
Yes.
Board Member Garagos.
Yes.
Board Member Zarifian.
Yes.
Chairman Malikian.
Yes.
The motion passes 5-0. Oh, and
May I say something?
Please.
I just wanted to acknowledge something as Board Member Garagos, I think, so well articulated. We just wanted you to know that staff realizes that this was a difficult decision, and the board was put in a situation to make basically a policy decision in the face of the vacuum that exists in our guidelines. And I just wanted to stress, if people do not know, that staff, half of the planning department staff, is working diligently with the North Glendale community, La Crescenta Valley community, to actually revisit the zoning and write new design guidelines for the area. And we appreciate the work that you did. And I think it's a real privilege for us to have this opportunity to actually start having the foundation for the design guidelines.
Thank you. We're going to go over the minutes now.
I have two sets of minutes for this evening. One would be from February 12th. For the previous four board members, except for Mr. Baladian, were present. And then also minutes from February the 26th.
Both.
Did we?
So basically, you need to abstain when we're voting. You just need to abstain.
Abstain?
Yeah, when
Because
we're
you weren't
voting
here.
on it, because you weren't here.
Okay.
So
So what is it?
so the next one, when you were here, then you can vote on. This was the
Did we get these?
I have to say anything?
Or I had them last time.
Oh,
These were the minutes that we had in our last board packet, correct? Yes. Which I did review, but I don't have them with me.
Do we have a motion on that?
It's for two separate dates?
Two separate dates. The
February
first one is
12th.
February 12th, which was actually the previous time that we heard this Foothill Boulevard project.
Yes, well, I will move acceptance of the minutes of February 12th.
I have a motion made by Board Member Carter.
A second.
Board Member Garagos. Board Member Carter.
Yes.
Board Member Garagos.
Yes.
Board Member Zarifian.
yes.
Chairman Malikian.
Yes.
And one abstention. And the minutes from February the 26th.
I will move acceptance of the minutes of February 26th.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Second,
I'll second it.
Mr. Garagos.
He has that great voice, so it's just take motion.
We should be sitting.
Okay, so Board Member Carter. Yes.
Aye. Yes.
Board
It's sort of
Member,
like color commentary, huh?
Board Member Garagos.
Yes.
Board
It's
Member
long,
Zarifian.
5-all.
Yes.
Chairman Malikian.
Yes.
Okay, the minutes have been approved.
Any more items?
Is there a motion to adjourn at 7:25?
Actually, I have to tell everybody that I was watching Seinfeld the other night, and Mr. Carter was in that and did a fabulous job. I want to say it was.
Yes, and I plead guilty. I have several misdemeanors in the theater and on television, and they come back to haunt me periodically.
And that scene, it was just brought to life. Because
And luckily, Seinfeld is not rerun many times, so I don't.
Never.
I will never see that. I was actually Sue Ellen Mischke's boyfriend, Giuliani's periodontist, so keep an eye out for that one. Yes.
A motion to adjourn 7:25.
We better get out of here, and quick.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I love that.